Right, so what we're going to do, we're going to go through your career. We're going to start at the very beginning. So as a young boy, did films inspire you to enter the industry?
Yes, I mean, when I was a youngster, we didn't have television. Film played a very big part in their lives, so much so that they actually introduced Saturday morning pictures. They knew youngsters loved films. And so every Saturday morning, the youngsters could go to the cinema, and obviously they were children's films. Tarzan was a typical example, and we loved it. We used to look forward to our Saturday. And so when I eventually finished my national service, and when I was at grammar school, there was a girl there whose mother actually worked in the film industry. I said, what? She said, yes, she's the assistant to the production controller at Pinewood Studios. I said, I can't believe this. And she said, yes. And when we have our school holidays, she said that I must get a couple of friends and she's going to take us around a film studio. I said, I can't believe this. And that's what happened. And for a 14-year-old boy to go around a film studio in those days was absolutely unbelievable. And I've never forgotten it. It's a day in my life that will stay forever. Not only because we were going down the corridors and film stars were going past, oh my gosh, but we actually went onto a stage. If you ever stand outside a film studio, the only thing that separates it from a different factory are the huge buildings, absolutely huge. And these are the buildings in which they're called stages, and these are the ones in which they build the sets. And you're never allowed in them. I mean, there's a thing on the door saying disallowed, unless you. But because she was who she was, she actually took us onto a set where they were making a film called Hell Below Zero. And the hero was Alan Ladd, who most of you probably don't remember, but he was a big hero to us. And I sat there and watched Alan Ladd on, it was a ship's cabin, a massive ship's cabin. And I watched him rehearsing his lines. I said, I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm doing this. And I kept thinking, well, how the hell did they get a ship's cabin in this stage? And when there was a break, I wandered round the back, and of course, it was all scaffold poles and bits of wood, and I realized it had been built, it had been created, it was a set. And I thought, what an amazing world this is. This is a make-believe world. And I never forgot it. I never forgot it. And years later, 5 years later, when I finished my national service, I thought there was nothing lost. I could give that lady a ring and just say, I'm back now. How do you get into the industry? And to my amazement, after all that time, she actually got back to me and said, Norman, I remember you. Come and have a chat. And I did go and have a chat. And she said, as it happens, they would like to have somebody new into the editing department, which, of course, I didn't know what the editing department was. And she showed me in, and there was this guy running film through a machine. And I thought, oh, it's not quite what I had in mind. Film industry to me was cameras and soundtracks and actors and stuff. But anyway, she said, if you'd like, you can stay in there for a while and see if you like it. And every time they said to me, Norman, take the film up to the projection box, we're going to have a running, I thought, wow, the film's grown. Every time I took it up, it had grown and grown and grown. And I realized that guy running film through the projector, through the moviola, was actually editing the film, cutting it together, creating the final film. And I was so enthralled that I said, okay, I'll sign up.
And one of the things, did you realise that Hell Below Zero was produced by Warwick Films?
Oh, at the time.
At the time, which was owned by obviously Cubby Broccoli. So in a way, you were destined to work on the Bond films in that sense. If you think that's just fate, isn't it? Irving Allen and Cubby Broccoli did Warwick Films, and then it disbanded before he went to Eon. With Harry Saltzman. So, just thought I'd share that piece of information. So, obviously, you had a 3-year contract at Pinewood.
Yes.
Yes. And then after that, Winston Ryder.
Oh my God.
I used to dig out an old
What
picture.
happened was they put me under contract for 3 years. And throughout those 3 years, which is why I've shown you these, sometimes they put me to assist a film editor that cuts the film together. Other times I ended up assisting sound editors. And so after 3 years, I knew exactly what a film editor did, and I knew exactly what a sound editor did. And I decided that I wanted to become a film editor. That was my dream. But, as he just said, I was taken aside by a couple of guys. They said, Norm, do you realize that out there are freelance people? And there's a sound editor out there who is a legend. Winston Ryder. He was a legend. Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, you know him. He did it. And they said, he's not an easy man to work with. His standards are very high, but he's looking for an assistant. And we reckon you would be absolutely right for him. And I felt a bit flattered, really, but I thought, wait a minute, this is sound. I want to become a film editor. But anyway, I look back now, and they said you will be working on big American movies if you work with Win, and I decided to work with Win.
Yeah, and it was a good decision because obviously you opened up more opportunities working with Peter Hunt on Sink the Bismarck.
Because the third film, so I worked on 3 major films with him, and the third one was edited by Peter Hunt.
Yeah, and then that obviously got you a good relationship, and obviously to work with on to Dr. No.
Yes, obviously the sound editors and the editors are very close, your team. But towards the end of the film, I realised that his assistant was going for a job in London. And I thought, wow, this could be a chance for me, if Peter would take me on as his assistant, for me to get back to picture. And he said, yes, that would be great. And we worked on about 4 films together. I was his first assistant. And would you believe he was given Dr. No?
Yeah, it's
Just like that.
Are there some pictures of you there?
Yeah, that's me.
Working hard. There we go. It's not an easy job. Obviously, you worked on this film before you did The Bonds as well. There was a Crooked Man.
I think that was the first film that he and I worked on together, yes. And then we worked on about 4 before he got Dr. No.
Because you was a big Norman Wisdom fan as well, so you was happy about that.
Yeah.
And then you also worked on The Fiddle, Sean Connery.
On the fiddle, yeah.
Before he became Bond.
I've often looked back and wondered how Sean Connery was given the job on the fiddle, because I would have thought that he was too manly for that, but nevertheless he got the part, and he also got James Bond.
Yeah. And can you believe they were financed by United Artists?
Yeah, there you go.
So it's all connected. Everything is a connection, and it all seems to be leading you to one way, doesn't it?
Very, very strange. But what's so strange is that with all my dream of becoming a film editor, I thought I would learn from Peter. As you probably have heard from now, the budget on Dr. No was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, when you think of the sets that Ken Adam built, and the whole budget was about $1.5 million, which is laughable now. And of course, when they finish shooting, when they normally hire 2 sound editors, one for dialogue, one for sound effects. The dialogue one would concentrate on the actors, bring the actors back to re-record lines that weren't good enough or suitable, and the sound effects editor would deal purely with the sounds. And to my amazement, Peter said, Norman, I'm awfully sorry, mate, but we haven't got, the budget is too low. We can't afford 2 sound editors. I said, so what? He said, well, we're going to have to promote you to be sound effects editor, and we'll hire in a dialogue editor. Well, I'd worked with the great Winston Ryder, but I'd never laid a soundtrack in my life. Win never taught me anything. I just watched what he did. I noted all his systems, and Peter said, well, that's the only way we can cope. We've got to upgrade you, and that was the most remarkable piece of promotion, I think, in the history of film.
And then once you was on Dr. No, you teamed up with Gordon McCallum, who was the chief dubbing mixer.
Yes. Now, what I learned from Win Rider was, he never taught me it, but I noticed what he did. he ran the film through and picked all the difficult sound episodes throughout the copy. And what he did was he concentrated. He would go into a recording theatre, just like, not a recording theatre, but more of a mixing theatre like this man had. And he would create sounds that he knew were going to be a challenge. So that when finally all the sounds were going to be mixed back together, they didn't have to stop to create this and create that. They were already created. And I thought, what a clever thing to do. So I did the same. As soon as I got on Dr. No, I picked all the problems, the silenced pistol, the electronic doors in Dr. No's apartment, the lift, the sound of the lift when they were in the lift, Bond in the tunnel when all the water was crashing over him, the vehicle that had to crash down the cliff, and my favourite sound of all was Dr. No crushing the little statuette in his hand. My favourite sound. So I created all those sounds like Wynne would have done in a recording theatre with that man, Gordon McCullum. He was a very, very difficult man to work with. You make any mistakes, he'd lose his temper. But I've never forgotten it. I didn't know that the sound department at Pinewood had run Dr. No. It wasn't the final cut, but it was the first cut, the assembly. And I was in my cutting room, and there was a knock on the door. And I thought, that's strange. And I opened the door, and the great McCullum was standing there looking like a little boy looking for sweets. And he said, when can we start? He knew that I would have to create a lot of those sounds, and he couldn't wait to get his hands on my ingredients, because I could see what Wynne did. He taught me that when you had a very difficult sound, don't spend hours and hours and hours until you've got it right. You record all the little ingredients that you think would contribute towards that sound, then go into someone like Gordon. He would have his mixing desk. You'd have all the sounds up top, and the two of you could mix, try this, try that with that, and eventually you would realize that this blend had created the sound you wanted. It was a wonderful system, and unfortunately, those theatres cost money. You know, every time I had a session, that was costing them production money. I didn't think about that, and I got this phone call from the production office. Fortunately, I'd done them all I wanted, and they said, Norman, you're costing us a fortune. You've got to stop. We can't afford this. I thought, this is ridiculous. Here's a guy who's been promoted for the first time to take on a job of that magnitude, who wants to work professionally, and now he's being told that he's got to stop. It was ridiculous, but fortunately, I'd got the sounds I wanted.
Yep. And obviously, Dr. No, you had a bit of a headache finding the sound for this reactor. The noise of when Connery turns the wheel, Bond turns the wheel, when it's got that.
Yes. Oh, you're ahead of me now. That's good.
Always ahead.
Some of you will have been here before, and you'll be bored hearing this same story. But I tell it over and over because it's the only time in my life that I have known real stress. All through the film is being, you know, the editor is fine cutting, and we're working away on the sound. But I knew that in the final scene in the laboratory, where Bond goes up there, all in his uniform, and he can see that handle there is controlling the nuclear machine. It's got the inevitable, got the thing there, you know, about danger and all the rest of it. And he eventually turns it and turns it and turns it. And I knew that I had to have a sound on that, a really effective noise that was going to keep people tensed up. And also Dr. No was going to be scared stiff because he knew that the nuclear reactor had been overrun. So I knew I needed a machine that when I switched it on, it would do a nice little one, but also have a control that you could turn so that we could synchronize it with Bond doing this. do you think I could find a machine? You know, I had so much work to do. I had other things to do, but I knew that machine was absolutely vital. And we reached a point where we were dubbing. Dubbing is when the cut is now finally cut. All the sounds that have been created over weeks and weeks of work by the sound editors and the music have all got to be mixed back together. And it would take a day to mix back every reel. And they had now reached reel 10 in a 12 reel film, and I hadn't got anything for that sound. I can't tell you the tension. I was up to here. How could I go in there with my soundtracks and they'd say, what you got for that, Norm? And I'd say, I'm sorry, I haven't got anything. They would have gone berserk. So in desperation, I went to the sound department and there was a guy there that was maintaining all the electronics. And I said to him, I said, look, I'm in big, big trouble here. Is there anything you can think of? Is there anything you could think that you could create a machine that would at least do? And he said, Norman, leave it with me, but I don't have much hope. 2 days later, he called me in to the recording theatre. I thought, what? And when I came in there, he pointed to the most ridiculous piece of creation I've ever seen. I mean, my heart sank. It was just bits of wood, bits of this, wires and stuff. I said, He said, no, Norm, turn that on. And I turned it on, and it went, wom, 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 wom. I said, yeah, but he said, no, turn that there. And when I turned it, it started to escalate. Even now I'm getting... Everyone in the recording theatre couldn't believe it. They said, this is ridiculous. What have you done? You've invented a machine. And he was very calm about it. And I said, well, you've saved my reputation. You know, I mean, what could I have done without this? So immediately we went in there and recorded that track. And so when we finally reached that reel, we had everything. I've never forgotten it, you know, that a guy could have done that for me. But had he not done that for me, I can't imagine what the outcome would have been.
Yeah. And we can actually listen to the clip now. Watch the clip.
Stand by. Run to full power. Fuel elements 21. Attention, all control. Going into operation now.
Last killing control has been made. The umbilical is retracted. All elements of progress and operation have reported that they are in a good condition for the flight. We are in T-minus 19 seconds. Counting. T-minus 15. Counting. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
You can still hear it going. It's still going in the background there. But yeah, brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. And everyone who's watched that film has not experienced what you've been through just to get that on screen.
No,
So,
no idea.
but we'll
just accept it as the noise you've
yeah.
done there.
But it's amazing. So well done. So we're going to talk about Goldfinger and talk about this part here.
Oddjob.
The sound of Oddjob's hat.
Many people have tried to involve themselves in my affairs, unsuccessfully.
By the way, you can't stop that.
Right. Oh, no, I've stopped the old bloody thing now. Right. Well, I stopped it, but yeah.
Can you reproduce it?
I will see what I can do. There we go. I got it back. Right.
No, the only reason I wanted
Go on.
was because, in all my experience, the dialogue editor, one of their jobs on this film and other Bond films as well, was revoicing someone. I mean, that is not just bringing an actor back to do a few lines that they would do automatically because they've got their own rhythm. But to revoice somebody, you're bringing in a stranger that has got to readapt to the character that they're revoicing. And in the case of Goldfinger, Harry and Cubby were very, very upset. They had no idea when they hired this guy that all he was going to do was learn his lines the night before and then speak them the next day. I mean, that's not being an actor. You know, you've got a character to produce. And so they realized that it was going to be a revoice job, and they hired, I've never forgotten it, we brought in quite a few actors, and we had a series of lines that they could speak. And Peter Hunt said to me, synchronize them roughly, Norm, so that we can run them all and decide which one has got the best chance of being Goldfinger. I've always forgotten the name.
Michael Collins.
Michael Collins was one of them, and we decided he was the one. And the only reason I'm mentioning it is the fact that in all my experience, I have never come across a revoicing achievement like Goldfinger. Even when I watch the film, I forget. I have to say, no, remember, he's revoiced. Collins gave him the right threat, the right sync, the right character, and the right accent. And I just thought you ought to know that in the history of film, that is a unique achievement. And Collins deserves a tremendous compliment for that achievement. So as he was on the screen, I thought it was just worth mentioning.
No, thanks very much for that. So let's go back to Objod's hat and the sound of the whizzing of the hat.
Many people have
And it's a
tried
really
to involve
iconic
themselves
sound.
in
There's
my
lots
affairs.
of really good sounds in
Unsuccessfully.
Goldfinger, but this is one of the most iconic ones, the hat. So how did you go about recreating that sound, the whizzing?
But what does a club secretary
What
have
it
to
was
say?
that
Oh, nothing, Mr. Bond. I own the
I
club.
knew that this was going to be a mixture of sounds, a bit like my Winston Ryder had taught me, that's a typical sound that don't spend hours trying different things and create it in one. I knew it would be a combination. So anyway, for some reason, I had an idea, and I said to my assistant, you might probably fail, but go round all the toy shops and see if you can find a toy that we had when we were kids. Some of you will remember it and others you won't, but it was a disc, sometimes cardboard, sometimes metal, but string was put through it in such a way that as kids we could pull it apart and the disc would spin like crazy, you know. Oh, we loved it. If it was metal, people used to try and cut stuff on the spinning disc. And I said, I doubt you'll find one, but he did. He came back with one of those, and we went straight into the recording theatre and we recorded that. And I said, there's another sound I remember. When we were kids, it was a piece of metal about this long, and it was twisted all the way down. And we had a little propeller that we put on the top with a hole, and it worked its way down. And then, as kids, we could push that up, and of course, it came off the top spinning, and we used to love it. It would spin all around the room. We loved it. So we took it into the recording theatre, and they followed it with a mic. And I said to the mixers, I said, we're going to need a sound when it leaves the hand. We've got to create a threat. And we tried all sorts. We tried all sorts of sounds. And in the end, I said, I'll tell you what, let's get a carpenter's saw. They said, yeah, well, okay, let's get one. And we put it on the table with just the ends like that, and we twanged it. And immediately we all said, that's the one, that's the one. And that, I doubt many people ever hear it, but I know it's there. And so when it leaves his hand, there is that metallic threat. And there were, I think, one or two other elements that I can't remember, but we mixed them all together. And I always remember I went on I think it was Esther Ransom. She used to have a series of, a different series every week, which had a different theme. And she had one on awards. And somebody said to me, do you think you could join her with your award? And other people will be on there. Anyway, I did go on this program. And to my amazement, she introduced me, and she had a hat. And she said, when you throw a hat, this is what it sounds like. She threw it. And she said, but when Norman created a sound for a hat, this is what it sounded like. And she ran that. And the whole place applauded. And I thought, what is it about that noise that has that effect on people? But there you go, it works. And so I'm very proud of it.
No, it's amazing. And we go from one unique sound to the next. We've got the laser table. It's another one of them sounds again. And the sound, obviously, of the whole laser, and then you've got when it melts the table as well.
Yeah, the razor.
This is gold, Mr. Bond.
Can you hear an electronic sound for that?
All my life I've been in love with its color, its brilliance, its divine heaviness. I welcome any enterprise that will increase my stock. Which is
Very
to do.
interesting, you see, because the Bond films were moving.
I think you've made your point, Goldfinger. Thank you for the demonstration.
Futuristic type.
Choose your next witticism carefully, Mr. Bond. It may be your last.
It meant that the sounds that were required were slightly
The purpose
ahead
of our
of the
previous
sound that
encounters
was
is
available
now very
at the
clear.
time.
I do not intend to
sorry.
be distracted by another. Good night, Mr. Bond.
Do you
Oh, you
expect me
can't
to
stop
talk?
Oh, right.
Oh, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Oh, you've got Goldfinger's accent too there. And yeah, I mean, we, as Colin explained the other day, yesterday or this morning, that we have sound effects libraries. So instead of going and looking at all the books, you could go there with a list of sounds. You could say explosion, echo, cars and stuff, and they would bring out all you required. And if you heard something that you liked, you could buy a recording of it. And just trying to think, yes, but when it came to electronics, that's when they were limited. There weren't many things that you could, like I knew that I had to do the sliding door and the lift and stuff. That's when they would be limited, and you'd think, oh, what a shame. There's not much in the way of electronics. But then somebody mentioned to me that there was one company that had been established called the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. I said, oh, who are these people then? They said, well, they've been set up to experiment with music for for films that are made in space. Because film is made in space, you need music that has its own timbre, you know, its own relation to space. And I thought, oh, well, they sound interesting then. And when I had that beam, that thin beam, for some reason, I can never hear it now, but I called them, and the guy came out to my editing room, and I showed him that, and I explained I wanted exactly what I wanted. I wanted a thin, steely sound. And he went away, sent me a recording back a week later, and it was exactly what I asked for. But whether or not it's still on the film, I'm not sure. But on You Only Live Twice, because I'd now had a relationship with them, You Only Live Twice, in the volcano, a rocket exits the volcano and descends. Where would a sound editor find a sound for a rocket that was exiting and arriving? I knew that with lots of time, I could combine sounds together again and create that sound. But I said to them, could you please just come up with one noise that basically covered it, and then I will add and subtract. And they said yes. And when the recording came back, it was complete. The complete rocket and the complete coming down. And even Peter Hunt, the editor, said, Norman, I am absolutely knocked out by your rocket sounds. And I wished I could have said, well, you know, I created it, but I couldn't. They created it. But it just shows you the era we lived in, where the limits of creating sound existed, and companies like that were invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to hand you over to Nick, and we're going to talk about Never Say Never Again.
Yeah, so your fourth Bond film, Thunderball, you thought might be a good experience for when you were asked to take on Never Say Never Again, but I understand it didn't turn out to be a good experience as you thought it might, and you might have thought of saying never to doing it again.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it was strange for me. I'd already left the industry, and a chum of mine got in touch, and he was the assistant to the American editor. And he said, no, I don't know if you'd be interested, but Sean isn't the same as he used to be. He, because those early Bonds were like a team, like a family. I mean, Peter Hunt edited every one of them. I know they did have different directors, but basically they were like a family. And apparently suddenly on Never Say Never Again, here he was in a completely different world. And he apparently wasn't that happy. And my chum said, would you consider coming back? I said, well, I'd never met Sean. He said, no, but he knows you, and at least you would symbolize the original Bonds that he relates to. And one thing led to another, and I did go back, and quite frankly, it wasn't a very happy film at all. It's very unfortunate. I don't know what it was. There was one guy came back to deal with all the money side, but he had this way of setting people against each other, and it was very bad news. But when the film was finally put together, it was the first, what we call assembly, not fine cut, but assembled. We took it into a theatre, and we all sat back and watched it. And when it reached the end, it all went quiet. Nobody wanted to speak. And eventually the writers said, all right, let's be honest, why did Bond go to the Bahamas? And we all said yes. Why did Bond go to the Bahamas? For some reason, I mean, normally a script is you have draft upon draft upon draft, making sure every detail is perfect. But they didn't do it on You Never Say Never Again, and there wasn't a reason for Bond to go to the Bahamas. It was just unheard of in the making of movies. To this day, I'm never quite sure how they got around it. I mean, whether or not they shot another scene or whether they did some dialogue over the back of someone's head or what, I just don't know. But there you go. That was Never Say Never Again.
But part of the film, it did have a positive aspects for you, though, because it was, later on, technology helped to create sounds.
It was what, sorry?
Technology helped to create the sounds for the film?
Oh, yes. As soon as I arrived, I saw all my old chums, and they said, Norm, the days when you mix 6 tracks together to make one sound, they're all over. I said, what? He said, oh, yeah. They got guys now with these machines. Whatever you want, they will make. I said, I can't believe it. They said, oh, yeah. And of course, there were scenes in You Never Say Never Again, like they played the game. You remember the game with the world? And you had to conquer different... yeah. And of course, that was all electronic. You needed sounds for this, sounds for that, and the turning of the thing. And I got in touch with one of these guys. They were £100 an hour, they were. But it was amazing. I mean, you could show them, we had advanced so far that instead of describing something, you could say, show them the scene on the screen, and they'd say, oh yeah, what do you want? And they would start on this, that, and the other, and up it came. I said to myself, my God, hasn't times changed, all this mixing tracks together to make one noise. Now you had people that could create virtually anything.
So I was going to say, so by contrast, then the Thunderball, when you worked on that film, was it a bit easier to work on, finding the sounds for that one, being your 4th Bond film?
What, Thunderball as
Thunderball,
opposed to the other ones?
yeah. It's obviously going back to creating something yourself.
Well, the only thing about Thunderball from the 5 I worked on, or the 6 I worked on, was that I think that no film had been made before with so much underwater. And they hadn't thought enough about it, really. Was it going to be music? Was it going to be sound effects? And when you think about it, it was all very well me creating bubbles and the sound for being underwater, which I did. But there were some scenes where it was just a mass of bubbles. I mean, where do you stop and start? And in fact, I had one colleague whose sole job was to deal with the bubbles, which is extraordinary, really. And when I look back on it now, I don't have the same satisfaction as I did with the other films. I think, really, we should have had more combination with the music. And as it happened, purely by chance, the first thing I did when I came on the film was to experiment with a sound so that when you were underwater, you felt you were underwater. A nice bassy, and I slowed up tracks and all sorts of things. And finally, I thought, no, that's good. That's a good sound. When you hear that, you feel you're underwater. So when we had runnings of the cutting copy, because the underwater stuff hadn't been recorded with sound, it was very, very boring because you had to sit through silence, okay. So at least what I did was to wind my underwater sound into the cutting copy, so that at least if you had a running, you could hear some sound and you felt you were underwater. And just by chance, the running we had, the composer, John Barry. Quite by chance, it never really normally happens at that stage, but John Barry came and sat in to watch. And when we finished the running, he came over to me and he said, Norman, I'm so pleased I came today. Now I've seen what you're doing underwater, I know what to do. He said, I was going to put 6 trombones over that water. He said, but now we can think straight. And I always used to think, and Colin and John will think the same, that if only the composer and the sound effects editor could come together and say, well, I thought, and he'd say, well, I thought, you could come up with a combination. But as it is, you've got your job, they've got their job, and so often scenes would come up where the music and the sound effects just didn't gel. Something had to go. And sometimes something you'd spent hours creating would have to be cut out because the music was the best to overtake the scene. And that was a typical example of that, though, that it gave him pleasure and it gave me satisfaction as well. Very rarely does that happen.
Oh,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Now back over to Matt.
So, out of all the films, what film did you enjoy working on the most?
Yes, I've been asked that many times, and looking back now...
We'll change it.
Yeah, that is a tricky one. I think probably Goldfinger. But looking back now, if I hadn't been under so much stress as a newcomer, I think Dr. No. Yeah. It's amazing, actually, that years later, the 50th anniversary of Dr. No, Gareth Owen decided to have a celebration at Pinewood Studios. And obviously he was going to show a film, we were going to have a meal, we were going to have chats, and he obviously decided that the obvious film to run was Dr. No. I hadn't seen it for 50 years. So I thought, right, come on, sit back and watch it. I mean, for people that have worked on films, it's very difficult because you're analysing and remembering and all the rest of it. And I tried to switch off totally. And, you know, I did switch off totally. And then I realised why Dr. No was a success. I thought, yeah, I got quite tense in places. And I thought, now I can see why. Because all through the making of Dr. No, nobody had any idea whether it would be a success or a failure. And I had the occasion to go to a screening, a casual screening, and Harry was there. And he was, what do you call it, these screenings? You know, when you have a screening of
film premiere?
Preview.
Yeah, sort of a preview, really. But I saw all these people going into the theatre, and Harry, I've never seen anything like it. The look on his face was absolute terror. And finally, they all came out with smiles on their faces, saying, and Harry could relax. And it just proves that it was one of those films where you just didn't know which direction it would take. You knew that for a whole first half you had Sean, cool guy, you had Ursula, you had the tarantula up the arm, you had a gutsy film here. But then how were people going to react to Dr. No? I mean, this guy, was he going to be a bit of a laugh or was he going to be taken seriously? And people did. And the film was a huge success. It's amazing, really.
Yeah. Would you say one of the sounds you're most proud of is when the crushing of Oddjob's car? Because that was done with a toy, wasn't it? Toy recorder.
You're talking sound-wise?
Sound-wise, yeah. Would you say that was one of your prouder moments because you had nothing to record on?
Are you talking about the...
Yeah, the crushing of the car, yeah. Mr. Solo getting... in Goldfinger, sorry.
Oh, you're talking about
Goldfinger, yeah, where it gets crushed, where the car gets crushed.
Oh, yeah, I mean, nobody else would think about it, but from my point of view, having created so many noises, whenever I see that crushing, I know that with all the technology in the world, I couldn't improve it. And when it was dropped and it hits the table and then the ground, I think, how did I do that? The sheer weight of that item dropping. It's just one of those funny things, that you look back on and think, yeah. And that's become my favourite sound.
Yes, so we're going to move along. Obviously, you did Romance on the Orient Express, then you retired. Look, you got...
Oh, my God.
There's a great picture of you there as a plumber, like this. And then spending more time with the family, so you moved up north. Yeah, got some lovely pictures there. And then you went away visiting all sorts of parts of the world.
Travel became when I lost my wife, travel became my life, really.
Yeah.
And
Venezuela, I think.
Yeah, that was Venezuela. Yeah. There was a company called Explore where they would bring about a dozen, no more, of strangers together who'd never met before and take you away on an adventure holiday where you didn't just view things from a bus. You actually met the local people. You travelled on boats. You climbed hills, and I had some wonderful trips with them. And that was one of them, Venezuela.
And we're going to move back in time now because we've got Bob Hope there, the Oscar ceremony. So how did you go about getting nominated for the Oscar for Goldfinger?
Oh, how did it occur? Oh, yeah, well, Peter Hunt and I carried on working on films, and we worked on Ipcress File. Ipcress File was the only film I ever worked on when I knew we were on a winner. I just knew. It's very rarely that you always think, well, but I knew. But I was in the recording theatre, as one does, and Peter came in one day, I couldn't believe it, and he said, sorry, just disturbed you. He said, I've got a telegram here. The Academy in America want to know who was responsible for the sound effects on Goldfinger. And we all said, well, Pete, you know that. And he sort of thought, oh, yeah, I suppose. But we just thought they were getting a database, they were building up names on who did what with whom. And we carried on working. Never thought about it. And a couple of weeks later, to my amazement, we actually got an invitation to go to America to attend the award ceremony. And suddenly we realized that this was a nomination. And the reason we were so confused was that the Academy had always found sound an enigma because nobody really understands who the sound award should go to. You've got the guy or the lady who recorded the sound when they were making the film. You've got the sound editors that take it all apart and add and subtract, and then you've got the Gordon McCallum, who have the job of blending it all back together again. So who are you going to give a sound award to? When I first joined the industry, the sound award was invariably in a glass case in the studio where the film was made, because where else are you going to put it? Who are you going to give it to? So obviously the American Academy, the Editing Academy said, look, this is wrong. Sound effects is very creative. You know, somebody has to create these sounds. You know, like my friend over there did the other day, Colin. And they said there should be an award for them alone if you're not going to have just one for sound. And so, unbeknown to us, they had created a sound called sound effects. We didn't know that. And the year before, it had been given to a film called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. But it hadn't been announced to us. We hadn't been told that they'd got this new thing. So suddenly we had to realise that we were being invited to the Academy. So my wife and I said, well, you know, obviously we're not going to win an award, not going to get an Oscar. So let's go and enjoy a trip to America. That would be something rather special. And it was only when we arrived there, and they gave me the brochure for the evening, and we looked through it, and to my horror, there were only 2 nominations for sound effects. And I suddenly realised that we were going to have to take this very, very seriously. 50% chance I might have to go on that stage. And the rest is history.